Hello, beautiful moms and entrepreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, and I'm your host of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. This is a place where we come together to learn, grow, and inspire. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello, Unbreakable Mompreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, your host, and today we're here with Katarina Polonska, and we are going to talk about relationships, which is a topic that I was actually on a trip and I got back early this morning, but we were talking about that. And so it's an important thing that I don't think we talk about enough, and it affects every single day of our lives. So without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Katarina, and I'm a high-performance relationship coach for executives and entrepreneurs. And simply put, that means I work with a lot of high-achieving, busy, career-driven people, and I help them with their relationships. I do also do kind of more executive relationships and kind of co-founder dynamics too. But really my passion and the bread and butter of what I do is working on the romantic side of things. And I really got into this partly from kind of on a personal front, seeing a lot of dysfunction in the romantic relationships in my life. I watched my parents go through a divorce. So I was essentially mediating in my early 20s, and that was pretty harrowing. And they were both very, very career-driven people. And then after that, despite doing all the therapy, 15 years of therapy and doing a lot of work, I was working in behavioral science. I had done lots of retreats. I'd read all the books. I'd really done a lot of personal development. I found myself struggling with my own romantic relationship. I ended up engaged to the wrong person, and that was incredibly fraught and challenging. And in that space, I actually did a lot of marital counseling and really tried to figure out what was I doing wrong. And in the end, I ended up leaving that relationship and going through this essentially crisis of identity. I was in my early 30s. I really wanted a family, and I didn't know what I'd be doing at this point. Walking away from an engagement, from everything kind of that I wanted ahead of me, was terrifying. And so I spent about 11 months just really digging deep, really digging deep. I was working in behavioral science at the time. So, that is my background. And I had already completed my master's degree at Oxford University in gender dynamics. So I already knew a lot about, how men and women relate. I knew a lot about attachment theory. I knew a lot about trauma. I'd overcome anorexia in my life. So I kind of knew a lot about the unconscious blocks. And really, for the first time in my life, when I called it that engagement, I kind of brought everything together that I knew. And I actually had trained as a coach in NLP and hypnotherapy, 17 years prior. I think I was one of the youngest in the UK when I did that training. And so I kind of brought everything that I knew and really put it into practice, really embodied it, and began to play around with, I'm going to figure out, where did I go wrong? How can I do this kind of systematically and really focus on it, and not do what I now call the scattergun approach, which was me kind of working, being really busy, and then just doing a bit of therapy here, reading this book, scrolling on Instagram and following this coach. It was all kind of very haphazard. And in those 11 months, I just really sat down and really decided to figure it out. Within those 11 months, I met my now husband. And that's when I decided to shift out of corporate, out of behavioral science, trained to become a coach, become an executive coach. And that really was a safe choice for me, being an executive coach. I was like, this is what I should do. Of course, I went to Oxford, have a corporate background. I actually found it quite dull when I was in the executive coaching. I found it quite dull. And in all of my conversations with the execs, I kept kind of exploring, why is there so much anxiety? Why is there the stress? Why are they really burning out? And it's probably partly my framework as well, and my kind of lived experience. But ultimately, we ended up drawing down on their relationship, on their romantic relationship, and recognizing that things aren't as good as they could be there. These are people who have a great career. They're very driven, very successful. They are very smart. They have good friends. They work out. They look after their body. They eat well. They have a lovely home. They have good investments. They have all the good things. And they've probably done a lot of personal growth because, they've come this far. But when it comes to the romantic relationship, it wasn't great. And that's when I noticed that, okay, there's a trend here. And it wasn't just me that was suffering with this. And so that's when I decided to train deeper into becoming a relationship coach, trained in attachment theory, and brought it all together, built a methodology, built a system based on what I had done to meet my husband and turn things around for myself, tested it on a load of Oxford PhDs, it's now called the Successful in Love method, and I got it trademarked about a year ago. And now this is my full-time gig, helping execs transform their marriages, really, from feeling alone and unsupported in their relationship to feeling what I call successfully in love. When you're happy, when you're thriving, when you feel supported, when you feel connected, when you feel you've got that spark of life back, both with yourself, with your life, and with your partner. So that's really what I do.
That's amazing. And that you're in my passion, because I just wrote a book called Flipping the Iceberg, which is all about the relationships. And
Amazing.
for the same reason, I love that you talk about how people have the success and they look the part, they look at, like, everything's together. But if you actually flip the iceberg and look underneath the water, they're miserable.
Yeah.
Because they don't feel fulfilled. And it's interesting that you talked about how they feel alone.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I'm divorced, and I was running these successful colleges, doing all these things, and yet I was absolutely miserable because, my husband, he thought he supported me, and that meant he supports me in my job because I brought home the bacon, so he didn't have to do anything, right?
Oh, I know that one. Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, support means something different to each person. And so, my husband now, I just got back, he completely supports me in what I do, but has zero desire to do anything that I am interested in. And it's hard sometimes. It's hard. And so how do you bridge that gap with people? Do you meet with both of them? Do you just meet with one of them?
Yeah, really good question. And I love that you asked this. So I think my approach is a little bit different from the typical couples work. One of my biggest frustrations when I was working on my first engagement was knowing that my partner didn't want to do the same level of personal growth that I did. It wasn't in his interests. And he was interested in other areas, but when it came to like relational growth, it was, minefield. And so I didn't want to be that person who's nagging him to come to couples counseling, even though we did do couples counseling. I also didn't want to be that person who was passively aggressively sending him like, here's a book you should read and a podcast. I mean, I did do that and it was awful. It didn't work, right? And you develop this parent-child dynamic and it is just awful. And so I really was looking for something that would be self-sufficient, that I could do on my own to feel like, you know what, whatever happens, I have put 1,000% into this. I have taken responsibility. I have cleaned up my side of the street, and I have a clean conscience knowing that I really have done everything at this point. And from this place, from this vantage point, let me see the relationship and evaluate how are things going. And so the programs that I run are aimed at individuals, and I work with both men and women. And the idea is that you can do this work. You are not pointing the blame at your partner, because that never gets us anywhere. You are looking at yourself, and you are looking at what are the unconscious blocks that you bring to the relationship. How are you showing up in the relationship? What is your side of the street? And how can you clear those and start showing up in a more productive way to bring your best self to that dynamic and communicate clearly and know your needs and express those, not get triggered, manage your emotions, all of these things, so that ultimately your partner will perceive you and feel you as a very different person. Ultimately, you become securely attached, right, in kind of layman's terms. And then as you are securely attached in that dynamic, your partner will either typically be inspired to step up and meet you there, because securely attached people tend to do that. We inspire people to step up and actually want to do the work, or they won't. And if they don't, then you have the answer that you ultimately need to know what's happening in the long run, right? Like, this is kind of how they are. And am I willing to accept this? If so, okay, here's my lot. Or am I going to walk away? I will say probably 8 out of 10 times the partner does step up that I see. And that's really lovely, right? Because it's kind of this idea that you don't have to poke and prod someone into change. You become the change and you inspire them to want to change.
However, you said 8 out of 10, there is the 2%. And I think that that's the hard part, is that you mentioned that you have your answer. And I mean, you do your part. I love the analogy, you clean up your side of the street, because it very much is that.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect, so we all can improve. But sometimes people don't. And so you mentioned attachment theory. I call it codependence. And sometimes people stay in the relationship because of that codependence. They
Yep.
don't know what's on the other side, and they're afraid, so they just stay in this miserable relationships. What is your advice on people who are codependent, and how do they overcome that?
Yeah. The answer is, and I'm going to try to not use secure attachment language, but to become securely attached, right? The answer really is in building the best relationship you can with yourself.
Yeah.
Because when you think about that codependence, there's going to be an inherent neediness coming from there, right? And there's nothing wrong with being needy. Absolutely. No, we all have needs.
Yeah.
You just need to get them met yourself. And we're not saying you need to get them 100% met.
Mm-hmm.
You just want to get your own needs met to at least that kind of 50% mark. So that charge, that kind of energetic charge of craving and yearning for another to swoop in and rescue you or give you what you want goes away. And then from that place where you are getting your own needs met, you are feeling more independent, you're feeling more grounded, calm, centered, you can manage your emotions. You don't have that same pull, that same kind of magnetic pull, which Hollywood has made into this idea of chemistry and the fireworks, but all of that is complete BS. Like that is such a red herring. It really is. Like you do not want to be having fireworks and chemistry with your partner in the long run. It's not the best chemical reaction. You want to feel safe. You want to feel supported. You want to feel stable on your own. And ultimately, yeah, if they need to go away for a couple of weeks for work, you're not going to lose your mind. You're going to be okay on your own, right? So to me, it's all about building that really healthy relationship with yourself, where you're in regular dialogue with yourself. You hear yourself, you meet your own needs, you respond to your own triggers, you're kind, you're curious, you're compassionate, and you're kind of parenting that little inner child, which we all have, and not letting them feel abandoned and reaching out for the next person who passes by, right?
And I think that that's the part that we see, because first of all, congrats that you actually walked away from your engagement, because
Thank you.
not everyone does. I didn't, and I knew that it
Right.
was wrong. And I understanding what a commitment meant at that age, because I was only 19, was
Oof.
like I had no clue. I had no clue
Mm.
what that meant. And so because of that, you try to make a marriage work, you know that it's wrong, you try to make it work anyway. And so I think that, going through what I went through, you really do have to focus on yourself first, and not in a selfish way, but am I healthy? Am I healthy
Yeah.
mentally? Am I healthy physically? Those go hand in hand. And so with the listeners listening right now, I think of moms, single or married or whatever, engaged, and they're listening to this and they're thinking, okay, I'm not happy in my
Yeah.
relationship. What do you say to them?
It can change. You don't have to stay unhappy, right? I hear you on that idea that walking away, I'm not saying that you should walk away at all, right?
Right.
At the same time, walking away doesn't indicate a failure. Often it indicates a huge success, actually, because you are advocating for yourself. And I'll never forget when I went to see my divorce lawyer, my family lawyer, and she was so surprised to see me. She was like, women don't come this early on in the process. They typically take the man back, go ahead with getting married, have children, merge all their finances, and then something happens and they come to me, right? And she's like, and then it's a much bigger thing to have to work with. And so walking away can often be the best thing that you can do, absolutely. But it doesn't have to be the thing that you do. It can change and it can all start with you. You have a lot more control and power than you think. And really, the first place to look is looking at how do I feel within myself? And is what I am seeing in this relationship that's making me unhappy, is it's a bit of a complex one, but is it a projection of mine from something from the past? Am I bringing stuff from the past here? Or am I responding in real time to the present moment? And the way that you can discern that is by looking, okay, well, if I'm feeling alone and unsupported, or if I'm feeling unhappy, or if I'm feeling betrayed, have I felt this before? Is this something that I have felt before in previous relationships? And if so, then it may well be a pattern and something that you're actually projecting.
Right.
If it's something quite unique to that one relationship, then it might be a real-time response to a present moment, right? And that's going to give you more information on, okay, maybe this is actually something to do with the dynamic. Either way, it all starts with you and building that muscle of learning to discern what are you actually bringing to the table. Does that make sense?
100%. And I totally agree, because, it's interesting that when people break up, you see sometimes two different types, where they replace the person with almost this exact same looking type person, or they have the same type of personality.
Yeah.
In my case, like I went from one guy, you put them both next to each other, you're like, what? Like this is control, I mean, complete opposites. Or is it? Because if you get to
Mm.
know them, do they have the same type of personality, or do they have the same type of habits, or do they
Yes.
have the same type of things that they do? My husband and my last one, do not have the same personality at all. But
Hmm.
are there similarities in some things? Yeah. I talked to my daughters about they have a type, right? You have a type. And until you can figure out, because all of her relationships have been unhealthy. One of
Mm.
my daughters, I'm like, you cannot get in a relationship until you get a lot of counseling, you get a lot of help. And so she was free for about 6 months, but now she's back in this relationship with the same type of person.
Yeah. Right.
Hey, this, and she thinks, oh, this is the first time I've ever thought about marriage. And I'm like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a
That must
nice
be really
guy.
hard. That
Yeah.
must be so hard.
Yeah, and so I think that that's the part is if you are not healthy with yourself, and that's what I talk about, like that's the first secret. You have to be healthy with yourself.
Yeah.
And so say that you're not. Like, how do you fix that? They come to me,
Yeah.
I know, but you deal with executives. So what do you do? What have you
Yeah.
done?
Yeah. And I think we almost need to kind of define what healthy is, right? Like, what is a healthy dynamic? And I think in the act of defining what a healthy relationship with yourself is, we actually define the steps.
Right.
And to me, it comes down to really, again, building this muscle where everything that is going on for you, every little trigger, every bit of anxiety, every emotion, every little part of you that is speaking up internally, you accept,
Mhm.
you listen to, you validate, you acknowledge even the ugly bits, even the shadowy bits, even the parts that are like, oh, I don't really like that. And oh, this is a really ugly part of me. And oh, I don't like this anxiety. It feels really horrible. The relationship starts with you leaning in and wrapping your arms around everything that comes up for you,
Mhm.
right? Because I think there's such a toxicity in the modern day where it feels like everyone's got an anxiety disorder, everyone's got something, right? And there's this real culture of like, we have to get rid of it. It's some kind of like malady that we have to get rid of. Everything's somehow kind of been medicalized and is something wrong with us.
You're supposed to
Whereas
feel numb. Yeah.
exactly, like I mean, you look at menopause, right? Like that's been medicalized like nothing else. And it doesn't have to be that way. It is a normal part of your human biological body. And in the same vein, feeling anxieties, feeling triggers, it's all really good information,
Mhm.
right? If you're feeling triggered, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling afraid, if you're feeling upset, this is all really valuable information around what's going on for you. So if you can start leaning inward and getting curious around it all and actually looking at it and bringing acceptance and bringing kindness and compassion and like talking to it, like it might sound a little bit wild. It's not about kind of dismissing it. It's about going inward and accepting it. And I really believe that in all of our anxieties and triggers and fears, there is golden information on things that we need to look at and things that we need to listen to. It might be that you have a past trauma that needs to be looked at and healed and processed. Great. It might be that something's coming up for you right now that actually is off. It's actually not working for you. Great. It might be that a boundary's been violated.
Mhm.
Great. It might be that you have some sensitivities around things because actually you haven't processed something. Great. It's about going inward, right? And not running from the parts of you that maybe feel a little bit scary. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because oh, if my husband ever listened to my podcast, he'd probably be upset. But it's true. I mean, you can only use the experiences and the examples that you
Totally.
have. And um, I had 4 kids from the previous marriage, and then we brought him in. And 2 of my boys are special needs, and they're not like, well, one was a lot more difficult. The other one was just a
Yeah.
sweetheart, but he really struggled with the first one. And so, like, the kids would say something and he would interpret that as you're calling me a liar. Like he would constantly say, and that was a huge trigger, and
Yeah.
the relationship would quickly deteriorate, or the conversation, I should say. And I'm standing there saying, no, he actually never called you a liar. But to my husband, he heard that and it became this escalated thing. And so
Hmm.
my son's thinking, what's going on? And I think that we don't always realize the triggers. And so when I said to my husband, when we were having a conversation, I'm like, why is this such a trigger to you?
Hmm.
And he's like, like he's completely oblivious to it. And so I think sometimes we don't always even have an awareness
Yeah,
of something that has happened, and that's
totally.
trauma or the trigger. And so I think that really looking inward to ourselves, like last night I came home, it was 1:30 in the morning. It was a 10-hour flight from Florida to here and all the layovers. And I just went to go put my food in the fridge because I was tired, trying to stay awake. And then I was going to go to bed. Well, when I walk in, bless my husband, the kitchen, the dishes had not been done since I left.
Mm. Oh
And
my
so,
gosh.
yeah. And it wasn't a lot because there's only a couple kids, but still, I don't want to wake up.
Yeah.
And the dishwasher was the dirty dishes that I put in, like as I'm madly trying to do before I take off to the airport, are still there. So needless to say, I wasn't happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm quickly trying to put stuff in and clean it so that I can go to bed because I'm tired. And he comes down super upset. Are you kidding me? I haven't been able to sleep. And so, I'm like, I know, are you kidding me? Why
Yeah.
haven't
Yeah.
you done the dishes? And, I think at that I could have handled it better.
Yeah.
The wrong, but I was in the wrong. It's in the middle of the night. Why would I be doing the dishes?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that it would have been, hi, nice to see you. I'm sorry. It was not my intention. I had no thought of doing the dishes at 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that that's the communication sometimes, that we all come from different experiences and different perspectives. And how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah.
So when you're working with clients, what do you do to try to help the couple or each person, even if you're not working with them together, to see the other perspective?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's again such a really good question. And I really had to do some thinking about this
Mhm.
because I know that kind of the obvious answer is bring them together into a joint session. But the reality is like, what if the other partner doesn't want to come to this session? And also, what I have seen time and time and time and time and time again is that the way a couple is in front of the counselor is not inherently how they are when they're at home, right? I've seen that with myself in my previous relationship. In the counselor's office, it was like a beautiful love story. My goodness, we're both crying, we're both committed. The counselor's crying. He's like, oh, you guys are going to make it. We didn't make it. Because as soon as we got out of that room, it was like defaulted back to what it was before. It was really good acting. And that happens a lot, right? Like we know 40% of couples still break up 2 years after having couples counseling. But anyhow, so I think the thing that I'm really big on is like, it comes back to having your own power and really owning your side of the street.
Mm-hmm.
And Terry Real talks about this, how when you're triggered, when you're both triggered, it's like you both default to your triggered, wounded little inner child.
Yeah.
And you're both having little tantrums, right? You're both kind of kicking off and you're having tantrums. And really, it just takes one of you to just calm down for a second and step in to your adult, to your mature, conscious, real-time adult who's just there to kind of diffuse the situation a little bit and bring empathy and speak firmly and kindly and compassionately and show a little bit of curiosity to that little triggered, child in front of you and really try to understand them. So it still comes down to, can you, and I'm big on like scripts here because a lot of this stuff is very foreign to us, right? Like we're not trained to speak like this. It might feel a bit clunky. Can you defer back to the scripts, the structures, the kind of the safety mechanisms of like imago dialogue, right? Can you come back to what we know based on science will actually diffuse the dynamic, will actually bring empathy to the dynamic, will actually validate your partner's experience and essentially lead by example. Because when you start to lead by example, yes, you're being, the bigger person and you have to put your ego aside a little bit. And that can be the challenge, but that's the greatest challenge. Once you've done that and you put your ego aside and you kind of just lean into this thing of like, okay, I'm just going to do this for the sake of us, for the sake of the relationship. And I'm going to step up and be the best that I can be and follow the scripts and try to bring some maturity to this dialogue. You will diffuse the dynamic, right? Because also we kind of co-regulate with other people, so they feel it. And to me, that's the best way. And you're not telling your partner what to say, you're not educating them, but you are kind of inspiring them through example. And that's the best way to I was going to say to train someone, not not talking about training dogs here, but you know what I mean.
No, it's true. I mean, here's a good example. When you start whispering, the other person starts whispering.
Exactly.
And
I'm doing it
so,
now.
exactly, right? And so that's the same type of thing is with my husband last night. Now, had he walked into the room, he was just yelling at me from the top of the stairs. But I could have easily handled that so much differently. Like,
Yeah.
"Honey, I'm so sorry." Like, but I went into my wounded self, like you said, and
Yeah.
thought about the ex-husband, how, like, again, we won't get into that, but it just, I relived it. And so
Yeah.
I'm not intentionally making a whole bunch of noise, but I was, because I
Yeah.
was mad.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the part that I love that. It's not that we're training, but one person can't continue to yell at another person if
No.
there's no response. Just like
Right.
one
Totally.
person isn't going to talk normal if the other person's whispering. And so I think that that's the part that we have to remember is people tend to mirror how we are behaving. And
Yeah.
if we can remember that, it's
Yeah.
difficult sometimes,
Yeah.
but it does help. It does help us.
Absolutely. And you just said something really important that it's hard to remember, right? Which is precisely why like 70%, if not more, of the work comes with yourself. And it comes with you co-regulating your own self, right? You managing your own triggers, you actually clearing out the unconscious blocks, the wounds, the limiting beliefs, all of that junk inside of you. That is what causes the triggered response, right? Because when you actually clear all of that stuff out on an internal level, using, working with your subconscious mind and actually doing that deeper reconditioning work, you're less likely to be triggered. You are much more likely, in the face of someone screaming at you, not going to scream back.
Exactly.
You're more likely to kind of stay calm and show curiosity of like, what's going on over here? And then put a boundary up of, well, I'm not available for you screaming at me. So I'm going to exit the situation and I'll come back in 30 minutes where I hope that, there's going to be much more kind of maturity and secure attachment around all of this stuff. So it comes down to working with yourself still.
Yeah.
Because trying to remember it consciously when you're in the, throes of a fight, if you're riddled with triggers, is hard. Your brain's been hijacked. You're flooded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, and I see that time and time again with people. So, and
Yeah.
it's hard. Like, it's like, how can you help them? Because they don't even see it. They don't
Yeah.
see they're acting out of control. They don't even think that they think they're 100% justified in everything. You're like, no,
Yeah.
that's not normal behavior.
Yeah. 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 No, totally. Totally.
Well, if our listeners wanted to find you as they're listening, like, okay, I got some work to do, how would they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place will be my website. So www.katarinapolonska.com. Hopefully you'll have that in the show notes because I know my name's a little bit funky to spell. And then when you're in there, I have a free masterclass where I walk through the behavioral science of attraction, which is really kind of the science behind my methodology. So it's well worth watching. It's packed with information and value. There's also a relationship audit there that you can do, and my podcast as well, if you want to dive into that and learn and apply all the learnings. If you want to DM me though, come on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Same name. I'm on LinkedIn. I live there, essentially.
That's fantastic. It's funny because LinkedIn, people weren't talking about it a lot, but
No.
it's becoming a lot more
Yeah.
popular as a means of use instead of some of the other social media stuff. So
Totally. Yeah. Well, we need to talk about it, right? Because everyone's in a relationship. Either you've walked away from a relationship or you're looking for a relationship or you're in one. Like it's a big part of who we are.
And I think that something we didn't really talk about at all is you're the child. I was going to say product. That's not what I meant, but you're the child of divorce.
Yes.
So even if you haven't experienced it, you came through that and you had to
Totally.
that.
Totally.
And so I think, I don't know of a single person, and I want our listeners to think about this as well, that has not been witnessed, experienced, seen, watched a couple in divorce, and especially the effects of children. And that's where I become very passionate because that traumatizes you. I'm glad that you're in a good relationship and healthy, but it could have gone so much worse.
Or it could have, for sure. I mean, I was single for 5 years after, right? Clearly it did. And just like final thing I'll say is that you can develop scars, like significant scars later in life. They don't all have to come from childhood.
Yeah.
I was very happy with very secure relationships. It was only when I was 23 that I became very anxiously attached after my father left and big abandonment wound. And it can happen later in life. Absolutely.
Yes. So what is one piece of advice that you would give our listeners?
To take action. Not only because your life will get exponentially better when you do. The key thing with taking action is that when you have a feeling internally that you're not happy or something feels off, or you think you could do better, and you don't take action on that feeling, you're essentially building you're creating mistrust internally, because what you're essentially communicating to yourself subconsciously is like, yeah, this doesn't matter. You don't matter. I'm not going to listen to you, right? And these are all really negative conditionings that we're doing to ourselves. And the most important thing that you can do to build self-trust and to improve your own relationship with yourself and actually improve your gut instinct mechanism and all of that is going to be to take action, to validate what you're feeling. So don't delay. If you're feeling off, do something, right? Reach out, like do something. Don't just ignore it, because that's going to be worse down the line.
And can I clarify one thing? Because I think sometimes when people say take action, don't be the victim though. And by
absolutely,
action, it's not let me just complain about it. No, and let me say, oh, I'm so unhappy. It's what are you going to do to change the situation? Precisely. Yeah, absolutely. How are you going to get some help, right? Yeah. Because I was a victim for 13 years of that marriage, and I was miserable, and I made people miserable around me. And so
I did the same thing. Yeah.
But ending a relationship isn't always a thing. If you have two people that want it to work, then try. Yeah. Try by trying to fix things together. So
Totally.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's great information, and you are doing like fantastic work. It's my favorite work ever. So thank you.
Awesome. Oh, thank you.
And listeners, if you want, like I said, to find more information, her website will be in the show notes. And so please make sure that you look for that and just find your happiness. You don't have to be miserable, that you can be happy and you can have a good relationship with yourself, with your kids, with your husband or your spouse, or your partner, or whoever it is. So take action, like Katarina said, and go out and make it a great day. Beautiful moms, remember, you are unbreakable. Keep illuminating the world with your strength, pursuing your dreams, and reveling in the splendor of motherhood. This is Charisse Walker, bidding you farewell for now. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the next episode of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. Until then, keep shining bright. Signing off with love, Charisse Walker.